Hello and welcome. Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights. And you ask me, what's all that about? Many years ago, before we went into big commercial mining, our forefathers used to mine. So during the Harmattan season, right about now, they go on the farm, get the gold, and then come the raining season, they recover their land and then use the same land for the agricultural process. But as time went on, I say mankind got greedier and decided to mine, much more in larger scales. Now, in doing that, we have depleted some of our lands, we have polluted some of our waters, and indeed, people who live close to mining areas tend to be the poorest. They tend to be more underdeveloped. And then you find out what is the way forward. So come in this society or this group who is now going to mediate between peace for those who live around mining and the mining area. But I just want to find out how it works. Because the miner wants his pound of flesh, the villager wants to keep his environment intact. Where do we bridge the gap? Today we're on a big educational trip to find out how we make peace between the mines and people who live close. When I come back, I will introduce my guest. My name is Nanan Sakwao, and this is PM Express. Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights. And by the end of the show, you will understand what that is all about, as to whether we need it or we don't need it. And with me, to educate me and you, to my immediate left is Onelia Esther-Osei, who is a Programs Director at Development House, and he's also the project head for VPSHR, which is Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights. Onelia, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Good. And then to my far left is Dr. Steve Mantia, co-chair, Ghana Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative and Campaign Coordinator, also with ISODEC. Doctor, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Doctor and I already started the argument before, because we're going to pick it from there before we can, because I thought that, we used to mine and as we need. We had gold, we used gold before the Obuasis and the Newmonts and everybody came in. And I'm saying mankind got greedy. We wanted the product in abundance. And in doing that, we deplete our environment and pollute our waters. But Doctor is saying we didn't get greedy.
Yeah, exactly, because, mining is somewhat a necessity.
Okay.
In fact, I look at you and what you're wearing, and a lot of what you have on you is derived from mining. In Europe, the great industrial revolution happened on the basis of mining. Coal for energy to drive industry, and steel for industrial manufacturing. And so there's a way in which mining can be beneficial to society. The problem is the irresponsible way in which some people, in the pursuit of profit, go about the whole activity of mining. And that is why measures are being put in place to ensure that the negative environmental and undesirable consequences of mining are minimized, so that at least the benefits will be enjoyed by mankind.
It is my dream. Everybody knows I'm a tree hugger, so anything to protect the environment, and I'm in there. But Onelia, let me come to you. The whole project says voluntary principles on security. I mean, shouldn't it be compulsory principles on security and human rights?
Okay, you have a point there, but we also have the national laws, we have international laws, and we have the African mining laws, and several other laws to guide mining. And most of these are compulsory. But this comes in as voluntary, like other voluntary principle, so that if a state signs onto it, they should do it on their own accord. They have the leeway to put in the necessary measures. And companies are also to sign on to this VP. And if they sign on to it, they put in the necessary measures by their own ways, take the necessary steps to ensure that there is peace and respect for human rights. And this, I think, is a good thing to do.
So we're going to use my village, Dumasa, as a test case, even though I don't have any gold there yet. But assuming I had gold there, and Dr. Mantia comes and he has Mantia mining and it's huge, what do I do? Come in and say, don't touch my water, don't touch my tree, don't touch this, and then he agrees to it. What do we go through?
Okay, so what would happen is now he has the license and everything to mine in your community. With this principle, he signs on to it, but there are even other companies around the world who have not signed on to it, but they see something good with this principle because of the respect for human rights. And in any case, for any mining company to thrive well in any community, they see it as a good thing for them, that there must be peace for them to work well, because we see around where there is conflict, they actually incur a lot of cost to be able to restore peace and operate very effectively. So that is the reason for this.
I'll stay with you before I go to Dr. Manti. I mean, this principle, is it a principle which you are bringing for both parties to sign, or is it a principle that,
Okay, thank you. It's an international initiative.
Okay.
And governments, NGOs, and mining companies are to sign on to this voluntarily, just as the name says. And then when you sign on to it, certain things are required of you. So that is what it's open for anybody who is interested. But we see it as a good thing, and we are encouraging all the mining companies and then the various states who have not yet signed on to it to see the good in it and then go ahead and sign on to it.
Doc, if you took material mining to Australia and you mined, let's say, 1,000 ounces of gold, by the time you'd gone through your environmental checks and protection and the minimum pay you pay to the workers who are mining in Australia, if you came to Obuasi and mined that, you'd make more profit because you paid the Obuasi guy less, you're not too bothered about whether the tree is chopped down and everything. So you make more money. So you wouldn't want to sign on that thing if you came to Ghana, because it will be eaten into your profit. Whereas if you were in Australia, probably it's compulsory, and whether you like it or not, your profit has been eaten. So they wouldn't want to sign it in this part of the world, would they?
Well, there is every incentive to sign on to the voluntary principles, even in our part of the world, because you find that characteristically we do have a lot of social strife, violent conflicts in some of our mining communities, and it is not in the interest of the companies, because whenever there's conflict, violent in nature, it disrupts their operations and therefore reduces their potential profit margins. And so every company would want to operate in an environment that is peaceful so it can produce more gold. But there are already in place laws that govern how mining companies operate. First is their contract, but again at the national level, there is what we call the Environmental Protection Agency that has rules and regulations around how you protect the environment in the course of extracting the resource. But you see, the environmental impact assessment, which is the tool for managing the environment within the context of natural resource extraction, has some gaps in terms of protection of the rights of citizens in the mining communities. It will look at forest protection, water protection for water bodies, etc. But it doesn't really address the issue of infringement on the human rights of the communities and also the human rights of the staff of the companies operating. There could be local people there and their rights could be violated as well. So, and the fact that there is no proper human rights risk assessment prior to commencement of mine operations, there have often been these unforeseen violent conflicts that have led to unnecessary loss of lives. So the voluntary principles is a way of trying to make up for the gaps in existing regulations and laws. In fact, I say this mindful of the fact that even the United Nations itself has guidelines on business and human rights. But these are rather broad and generic provisions. And so the voluntary principles targets the natural resource sector because this is a sector that is most prone to human rights abuses. And that is why I think that it is a kind of initiative that protects both the interests of communities but also the interests of the companies, because they want that peace and harmonious atmosphere to be able to go about their operations.
Doctor, let me stay with you. Do we try and bring the state on board of this principle, the state itself?
It is important. In fact, the voluntary principles was conceived as a multi-stakeholder initiative. the state on one hand, industry on the other, and then the affected communities, but usually represented by NGOs and other civil society groups, on the other, so that the three stakeholders can work together to design a framework that identifies the potential risk to human rights violations within the context of the operations of the company, and for the company to proactively take steps to ensure that these human rights abuses do not happen within their operational area. Even where they happen, the same platform is used to seek redress, to see how people who are affected are compensated, and how you prevent future occurrences. So it's a multi-purpose kind of multi-stakeholder framework that for me serves the interest of the state, because when there is violence in a particular mine area, government also will have to spend resources taking the police and the military there to maintain peace and order. And those resources could go into other uses other than the maintenance of peace and security in the mine area if we prevent these occurrences.
You see, Anilia, if you look, I Google Obuasi, and then I Google Johannesburg, and these two countries are producing, about the same amount of gold. They are two worlds apart. I mean, one is Mars and one is somewhere else. So I'm just going back to the point to say that if I was the mining company in Obuasi, it would probably be cheaper for me to give some Buga man $1,000 every month, give him an AK-47 here, stand there and stop the villagers from coming. Whereas if I went to Johannesburg, I couldn't have that audacity. So then I am obliged to, tick all the boxes. Here, instead of ticking the boxes, no, give them $1,000 a month or even $10,000 a month. Keep them off while I mine and get as many out as possible. How do we get them not to see this, £1,000 as a cheaper option, but go to Johannesburg and in the civilized country ways?
Okay. Thank you, Nana, for this question. Actually, AGA, I guess you are referring to Ashanti Gold, Anglo Gold Ashanti, which operates in South Africa and Ghana, have signed on to the voluntary principle, and they are supposed to implement it both in South Africa and in Ghana, and then to also bring to fore that Ghana is now a participant of the voluntary principle initiative. And so next year, March, we will be present in the annual meeting, and we will be presenting our first report. We actually signed on this year.
Okay.
Aside AGA, Newmont is signatory to it, Tullow is signatory to it, Shell, and some others who are working within our country. So what is required of them is that once you have done this, then there are certain things required of you. So we have come in, just like Doug said, to come together. Once Ghana has signed on to it, we have these companies signing on to it, and then our civil society bodies ready to see to the proper implementation of this principle. We develop a framework so that we can monitor the implementation of these principles by the mining companies. And with a VP, a lot of responsibility lies on the mining companies. And if we are on our heads and working so hard, we can achieve the best to be able to compare what is happening in Johannesburg with that of Obuasi.
So, Doctor, then I ask, why have we taken so long?
Well, I'll come back to the scenario that you painted. I'd like to make a point on that.
Sure.
Let us not assume that violence happens only in our part of the world. Wherever natural resource extraction takes place, there's likely to be violence. This is because of the paradox of plenty. You are in a small local community. You are the one going to live with the negative consequences of the mining activity. And yet, you get very little in return as compensation for playing host to the mining company. Now, the bulk of the dividends of mining accrue to national government. For instance, within the context of Ghana, 80% of total royalty paid by companies will go to the consolidated fund. 10% is supposed to go into the mineral development fund. And another 10% goes back to communities. So let's say 90% goes to national level government, and only 10% is returned to communities. Now, if you are in a community and you see so much wealth being taken from your community and so little being returned, you're likely to be incensed. And so you need only a very small provocation. Let's say disruption to the path to your farm, only to rise up against the company. And these demonstrations, I say, come at a cost to both companies and the state. Now, in South Africa, which is your example, not too long ago, there was a Marikana massacre perpetrated by lawmen against workers who were on strike. This is a typical example of how the rise of workers to demonstrate against poor working conditions can be attacked by a mining company. And so this is where the voluntary principle comes in to prevent such occurrences. So that rather than open fire on these workers, you could have actually engaged them around the table to discuss their concerns and try to find an amicable solution to the concerns they have. So it's a way of proposing dialogue as a way of dealing with potential conflict situations, which actually does not benefit communities, does not benefit government, and does not benefit industry. And that is why we're moving in this direction. The reason for lopsided development, okay, and I think the comparison between Johannesburg and Ghana is a clear case. Indeed, Johannesburg has been able to use its mineral resources to transform its economy. Ghana hasn't been able. But there are factors that account for this. First is the poor fiscal regime. I mean, until recently, royalties in Ghana were fixed at 3%. I mean, it was a range of 3 to 6%, but the mining companies stuck to 3%, the minimum, and nobody questioned them. Corporate income tax was actually at 25%. And in an era of boom, they were not required to pay extra profit tax to the government. Company concessions changed hands. They didn't pay capital gain tax, which was a requirement of the law. So it's actually weaknesses within our legal and regulatory framework that have been exploited, and to the disadvantage of the nation. Then there's the other side, how we utilize mining revenues. Over the years, we spent mining revenues largely on recurrent expenditure items, paying salaries. In fact, we sold our golden share in Anglo Gold Ashanti and used it to balance the budget for only 1 year, largely paying for salaries, etc. And so the manner in which we have actually designed our fiscal regime, the manner in which we have actually used the mining revenues is what accounts for disparity between development in Johannesburg and Ghana. But again, we want to also make sure that even though we haven't done so well, and as we take steps to correct those, because I need to make the point that we are making steps to correct them. Royalty in Ghana today has been revised from 3% to 5%. Corporate income tax has been revised from 25% to 35%. We're also considering the introduction of a 10% extra profit tax. We are renegotiating stability agreements with the two largest mining companies, Newmont and Anglo Gold Ashanti, to ensure that in an era of boom, they are able to pay more tax to our state. So we are taking steps. But even while we are doing that, loss of human lives within mining areas is unnecessary, but it's become rampant because communities, angry all by themselves without remedies in terms of inadequate compensation, in terms of loss of livelihoods, in terms of inadequate resettlement packages, sometimes have the only option of taking the law into their hands. So a voluntary principle initiative allows these people to engage the companies and government directly in a dialogue as part of the amicable solutions to their grievances. And I think that is why it complements efforts at ensuring that the economic benefits of mining actually goes far and wide and helps in poverty reduction within the national economy.
Anila, you've been on the ground where mining companies will give like 20 cedis per cocoa tree and stuff like that, and then when you calculate how much the cocoa would have left for 6 years and you tabulate it, it would have earned much more than the 20 cedis. Is the organization now going to send like a legal representative to negotiate between the miners and the people? Because they may go into an area where the people may be stark illiterate and may not have the confidence and the boldness to demand that, look, this is our right, and you're going to be using cyanide, therefore have a hospital with a cyanide expert in it just in case. They might not have that. Would you supply that, or how is it?
Okay, so with my organization, what we are seeking to do is that companies themselves, as I mentioned, have seen the need to implement this, and they've already put in strategies. So now we are not only going to be on the side of the companies, but both to provide advice and guidance, because one of the first principle of the voluntary principle is that there must be regular comprehensive risk assessment. And if a company does this, it must engage the communities in which their concessions are located. So with the involvement of the people, you would address their needs indirectly. And if any needs are not being addressed, these people will be supported by us and the coalition that we intend forming, so that we can support these people to seek redress in the necessary manner that is required.
Doc, are we leaving too much responsibility on the big boys that, well, you know what's good, go in there, build your hospital, you know what's good, go in there, give them 200 cedis per tree instead of 20? I mean, are we leaving it to them, or are we putting ourselves in the position to say, no, this is what we are demanding?
You see, companies respond to two things: money, profits, but they also respond to public pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And public pressure is one that can hurt their business interest and therefore their profitability. A lot of them have signed up to the initiative at the global level. For instance, Newmont, Anglo-Gold Ashanti, Goldfields, Tullow Oil. These are all extractive sector companies that operate in Ghana. Once they've signed up to this initiative at the global level, it does a lot of good to their international public image. They are seen as progressive, responsible companies. The next step will be for us as people in Ghana, who are usually likely to be hurt by the operations of this company, to hold them to their international obligations by ensuring that they live by what they have pledged at the global level. So that's the first. So we are not leaving everything to them.
Mm-hmm.
They have taken the initiative, they signed on to it, and we have to hold them to their word, to abide by their obligation to protect human rights within the context of their mine or oil operations. And that is why I think that we are not leaving much to the big boys, where we are forcing them, putting the public pressure, which they respond to quite effectively, to be responsible in their mining processes.
I'm going to take a break here. When I come back, you see, before the voluntary principles of security and human rights came in, which, you know, I'm almost signing up to, I believe in it, there were rules. But then you hear these big boys, like Shell in Nigeria was have an oil spill. Oh, well, it wasn't us. They went to steal their crude and spilled. I mean, we've had cyanide spillage here in Ghana, and the big boys don't seem to pay much. But there were still rules then which they didn't obey. What will make them obey this one? Stay tuned. Now, one of the voluntary principles, and thank you very much for staying tuned, is taking note, i.e. the companies themselves taking note of what's in the environment and, you know, being responsible. Now, before these principles came through, I'm sure EPA, within the laws of Ghana, laws of the whole world, and I used Shell in Nigeria as an example, and one of the major mining companies, I'm not sure, so I don't want to mention names, but, you know, had a cyanide spillage.
It was Newmont.
Newmont.
In Ahafo.
Yeah, they were not that bothered. I mean, they were not rushed off their feet to do anything or compensate people. That was the end of the matter. Shell in Nigeria has been spilling crude, destroying lands, and, you know, there's stories until this day. Nobody knows whether the pipes are getting burst or indeed pilfering is getting, but the detriment to the people around there is dire. I am saying, Doc, if we bring these voluntary principles, why would they suddenly say, forget about the laws that we know you didn't used to obey, now there's something in here that makes us want to now obey the rules?
You know something, in my view, laws don't change behavior. It takes moral suasion to change behavior. We have had the laws, but the companies have always violated these laws. So the time has come to also try complementary ways of changing the behavior and practices of companies through moral suasion, something that hurts their pockets. I mean, a lot of them are listed on international stock exchanges, and therefore any negative press out there could hurt their image. Mm-hmm. And so that is one thing that voluntary principles does. I can say for a fact that Newmont, for instance, which is the company in reference here that spilled cyanide in this operational area, is taking steps to comply with the voluntary principles. They've come to my office to meet with me to find out what civil society definition of human rights is, the scope of human rights. and we share with them that when we talk about human rights, we're not just talking about political and civil rights. We are talking about economic, cultural, and social rights. So that if your operations deny a community a right to a shrine, that is a violation of their cultural right. If it deprives a community a right to their livelihood, it's a violation of their rights. And so we are in the processes of defining the scope of human rights, working together with Newmont. And Newmont, we did not take the initiative, they approached us. They asked for other civil society actors in the mining sector that they could engage. They want to actually engage us so that collectively we can design a human rights framework for Newmont's operations in Ghana. Something that will guide their activities and something that they will abide by. So you see that sometimes voluntary initiatives work better than legal provisions. And I think it's time we try some of these things and see how they help address some of the concerns we have in the extractive sector.
Onelia, sometimes the one thing I find very disheartening in Ghana is that the very person you are trying to fight for, the very man you're trying to protect, is the one who gets up and says, "Who you two know?" How are the locals accepting these principles? Because if they think you're too no, you're fighting a lost battle. So how are they, we the traditional chiefs and stuff like that, are we buying into these principles?
Well, it's both sides. Some would buy into it, but like you're saying, not everybody would buy into it, but majority buys into it. For instance, the Achem mines, where Newmont is operating, our interaction with the community shows that they were very happy, and in fact, they were the ones pushing for Newmont to come. Little did they know what was coming for them. So it means that they were ignorant about a lot of things, even though they mentioned some civil society organizations which were there to forewarn them. And now that they know, they are ready to cooperate, right from the top to those at the bottom, because of the risks that the presence of the mining is posing to them. So majority of them are ready to cooperate with us, including the traditional authorities.
Let me share with you some statistics here.
Okay.
Somewhere February 2nd, 2006, soldiers acting on behalf of Anglo Gold Ashanti, Iduaprim Mine, shot 4 farmers in Tiberibe.
Wow.
On or around July 13th, 2005, the military opened fire on demonstrators, shot and wounded 7 people in Pristia.
Wow.
November 2nd, 2005, some farmers embarked on demonstration against Newmont Achem Mine in demand for fair and adequate compensation. The police responded by opening fire on the demonstrators. 2 people died from their gunshot wounds. This is the kind of problem voluntary principles is trying to deal with. Today, I'm happy to say that not too long ago, there was a demonstration in the Newmont Achem Mine over employment of local people. They call it local of locals, or local. So the people rose up against the companies and blocked access to the mines. So the management came, workers came, they couldn't have access to the mine. In previous times, Newmont would have brought in the police.
Okay.
The problem was resolved without bringing in any of the security agencies. They dialogued and invited the leaders of the people into the company to discuss their grievances and find collectively how those grievances will be addressed. This is why community people will not address anybody trying to advance the voluntary principles in Ghana as being too known. They are the beneficiaries. But of course, there's a need for education. And I'm happy that some initiatives have gone ahead. Global Rise have engaged a lot of communities, mining communities in Ghana, sensitizing them about the voluntary principles. But that is not adequate. We need to do more to make every resident of a mining community to know about this initiative and to hold the mining companies to what they have pledged at the global level. Those of our civil society groups that are actually at the national level, we need to have a monitoring framework to ensure that the companies are complying with what they themselves voluntarily pledged to do. And where there are infringements, we need to be able to flag this at the highest level, from national to international levels, in a way that hurts their profits and therefore make them responsive to their pledges.
Doc, another thing which I've seen it in your write-up here is to protect and to promote, and that government has a responsibility to protect and to promote. Now, the issue came up about a Tiwa forest, and I was amazed that anybody in Ghana, any sane person, would take a pen and sign that, yeah, there's gold under the forest, therefore, you know, go in there and mine. And thankfully, Inesef Husseini was the minister then, and he always said to me, Nana, I swear, not in my office time, nobody's going to go in there. And I always keep to, you know, praise him, and I'm thankful it never happened. But that's the sort of government or people in government that sometimes we have. They would have signed and gotten people in a Tiwa forest to go and mine. So is this principles also looking at those issues? Because otherwise, you fight you'll be fighting a losing battle.
Yeah, there are other complementary initiatives that are geared towards making governments more responsible and protective of their citizens. The government has signed up to another initiative referred to as the free, prior, and informed consent. That means before a mine takes place, before you open up a mine and even a protected forest, you need the free, prior, informed consents of those to be affected, people of the area, before you can proceed with the mine. And so this is some of the other mechanisms that are geared towards making our government responsible.
I'm happy you said that, because my next question I was going to find out is this surface rights business where, you know, somebody sees gold in my land, so goes to get a land, and then comes and says, look, I've got my license, I need to mine your land. I don't want to mine my land. I need it to farm. I want to green my area. I don't want to mine it. But you don't have any choice.
It is a weakness in our constitution that the international principle on free, prior, informed consent seeks to address. That the Constitution says that the natural resource, the gold, the diamonds in the land belongs to the state. But the access to the surface rights, the crops and other things belongs to you. So if we deny you access to the surface rights, we have to compensate you. But after the mine has closed, the land reverts back to you. What we are interested in is just the resource. But again, the community, insofar as they still belong to that area, will be affected. It's not just the access to surface rights they are losing, but in fact there's a whole disruption of their social life as a result of the mine. So their consent is necessary today before a concession is granted. If government does not do that, then it's violating that principle and it can be taken on. So these are some of the ways, and so we are making gradual progress as we go along. One principle comes in, another comes in to kind of complement the other, and that is how we make progress as a people. A lot of times the difficulty has been that we don't take advantage of these provisions because we are unaware. I'm pretty sure many Ghanaians are not even aware that before a mine project starts, the government needs to procure or secure the free, prior, and informed consent of the people to be affected by the project.
It's a good one, good lesson. But I'm going to take a break, and when I come back, something as noise pollution, just noise pollution, you know, constant blasting and drilling and everything. How do you compensate a community, you know, for this noise and nuisance, if I may say? Stay tuned. Well, thank you very much for staying. But as you can see, we are trying to educate ourselves, put policies in place so that I don't come on air always complaining about somebody's environment that got depleted. But before the mining starts, we'll all be in agreement as to where your limitations are, what you can do, what you cannot do, what I have to expect, what I do not have to expect. And I think it's in order, but we have to get it working. It shouldn't be one of those things that just become lip service, you know, shelf it and put it somewhere. It has to work. But before we want to break, I just wanted to find out, if a mine moved to Odumasa and they were drilling and blasting, keeping me up, keeping my baby up, funny rashes suddenly coming in the area, who quantifies it? How much is it worth?
You know, before mining, the EPA does the environmental and social impact assessment. And as part of it, they should be able to preempt all these risks so that the necessary measures will be put in place. But if it doesn't, if within the process, they are not able to take care of it, and then it comes in later, the mining companies should be able to deal with it, should be able to deal with it by providing, if there is the need for relocation, then it must happen. And it also depends on the intensity of the noise and the crack, because first of all, we have given them the opportunity to mine in our areas. So
yeah, we just give them opportunity to mine, not kill us.
Yes, they are not supposed to kill us. So that is why when there is any issue, the mining companies have certain departments which relate with those affected, so that they can they put in the necessary steps and address those problems that they are facing. So there are several opportunities that can be put before them for them to choose from it. Do you still want to stay there and take money? Do you want to be relocated and all that? So civil society organizations are there whom most often these people complain to, and then they receive the support so that they are being led to the companies to receive the necessary.
I mean, relocation will be completely out of the question. I mean, you know, people are so sentimental to, I mean, you know, I have gods and shrines in my town that I can, you know, move, you know, so relocations, you need to blast the thing differently or find a different method, because we have to live side by side.
Yes, yes, yes. And so there are different methods that the companies are also adapting, but sometimes it's such that you just have to relocate, and then you need to understand and move. But if there is another alternative, then we would push for that to be done for you.
Look, it's not easy.
No, yeah. Yes, it's not easy, but you see, these are all factored into the EIA processes. So that once the company does its EIA, does environmental impact assessment, the law requires that it subjects the report to a public hearing. In that public hearing, the proponent, the project proponent, as a mining company, is supposed to let the people know what the impact of his activities is going to be on them, everything about the project, including the noise that you are referring to. But I've been to a couple of the public forums, and it's all reduced to promises of employment and good life to come. So the real impacts are usually not discussed. And so when the project then begins, and then the impacts begin to manifest themselves, that's where you get the problem.
Employment is not coming.
Exactly. But sometimes you also find that some of these hazards are identified in the environmental impact assessment. And once you've done that, you are supposed to develop a mitigation plan or an environmental management plan, just of how you deal with it. You must satisfy the communities that this management plan is adequate in dealing with the problem before getting their consent and therefore the permit from EPA. But again, you see, the management plan usually is hidden. Nobody, once it's done, and then you've gone through the processes, and they say, this is what I'm going to do to mitigate the noise impacts. The communities don't get to see that document. There's weak compliance monitoring on the part of EPA itself, and one can understand they can be everywhere.
How so very true. Thank you very much. How so very true. Indeed, indeed, indeed. Once we get all these big multinationals, you know, flooding into our towns and promising heaven and earth because they're going to mine, it is important that you find somebody, an EPA representative, or somebody who has a technical know-how to explain in detail what or how much is going to affect you and your people, because anything affects your human right. If you're not able to go to the farm, it affects your human right. If there's too much noise and you can't sleep, it affects your human rights. How are you going to be compensated? And agree to this from the beginning, because once the work starts, during the work, you come and say, oh, now I need school, or now I can't sleep, it becomes difficult. So from the beginning, let us, as traditional rulers and custodians of the land, demand proper and fair equity for our people, because there's too many stories that we hear which is just not fair. I want to say thank you very much to Dr. Steve Manteau, who is the coordinator of Oil and Gas Platform, and also Onelia Osei, who's a programs manager for Development House. They've done very well in educating us on the need for protecting the extractive industry so we don't lose out. But on Thursdays, I know most of you follow That's My Opinion on Joy FM, or Joy FM Online, or My Joy Online. And tomorrow is Trial by Media, Ghana's biggest deception. Is she HIV negative or positive? Tomorrow you and I are going to comb through the stories and find out who is guilty and who is not guilty. It's going to be amazing. On Friday, our personality is Captain Nkrabia Ifadate. What a story he has to tell. And I know you've heard many stories, but there's an angle that we have all missed. And so don't miss Friday's personality. It is interesting. And yes, he sang a beautiful song for us. Folks, thank you very much for staying tuned. Tomorrow we'll be back to do it all over again.